The President of the United States is the highest elected office in the land, and the leader of the country and military, but it is still unclear what presidents truly know about the UFO phenomena. In this series, we will attempt to uncover what presidents of recent history know about the UFO phenomena by looking at the surprising statements and connections many of them have to UFOs.
Yes, we discussed it at every conference that we had with the military. There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and we've had other things, if I'm not mistaken.
Gathered in a schoolyard with about 20 other men, and we saw a bright light appear in the distant western skies, and it got closer and closer, and when it was just above the treetops, it changed color, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it disappeared into the distance. And none of us could ever imagine what it was, and I still don't know what it was.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet, I ask you, is not an alien force already among us? What could be more alien to the universal aspirations of our peoples than war and the threat of war?
I think it's time to open the books on questions that have remained in the dark, on the question of government investigations of UFOs. It's time to find out what the truth really is that's out there.
So I think there are lots of interesting discoveries, biological, on Earth, and other discoveries in the heavens that those of you who are younger will get to see unfold. You'll have all kind of problems with them, but on balance, it'll be a plus. And it'll make life much more interesting.
Did you go through the secret files, the UFO documents? Because if I was president, that'd be the first thing I did.
You know, it's funny, my daughters asked the very same question.
They did?
Yeah.
Would you be allowed to tell your daughters what was in those files?
No.
You would not?
No.
And I go through everything to find out what happened. Right. Did you do that?
That's why you will not be president. Because that's the first thing that you would do.
It's at the
top aliens
of my
won't let it happen. You reveal all their secrets. They exercise strict control over us.
Did you look? Did you see? Did you explore?
I can't reveal anything.
Do you think you'd know if there were evidence of extraterrestrials?
Well, I think our great pilots would know. And some of them really see things that are a little bit different than in the past. So we're going to see. But we'll watch it. You'll be the first to know.
So let's journey into the White House and examine the lives of those who have occupied the office of the president to see what they know about UFOs. Welcome to The Presidents. The first president we will be covering for this series is Donald Trump. I'm aware that he is a controversial person, but he is the president, and by studying all presidents and their connections to the UFO phenomena, we, the general public, can try to piece together what is really happening regarding UFOs. In this video, we will be looking at some of the strange UFO events connected to Donald Trump and his presidency to see if he knows more than he is letting on regarding UFOs. This video is not the definitive answer on Trump's UFO knowledge, but rather a collection of points of information I think people should be aware of when pondering the question for themselves. Trump speaks in an unhinged manner, so it is understandable to think that the intelligence services haven't told him anything on the UFO phenomena, or that he would have spilled the secrets by now if he did know. But, like I said, there are some surprising connections Trump has to the UFO phenomena that people should be aware of when deciding for themselves. So, let's begin. Before we look at Donald J. Trump and his presidency, let's look at his uncle John Trump, from whom Donald gets his middle name. John Trump was the brother of Donald Trump's father and by all accounts a brilliant man. John Trump was an American electrical engineer, inventor, and physicist. A professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology from 1936 to 1973, he was a recipient of U.S. President Ronald Reagan's National Medal of Sciences and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. John Trump was noted for developing rotational radiation therapy together with Robert J. Van de Graaff. He developed one of the first million-volt X-ray generators and helped develop some of the country's best radar systems. Donald Trump often cites his uncle when promoting his own intelligence.
Even had an uncle. You know, if you believe in genes, some do, some don't. My uncle was a great professor, but my uncle was a professor for years. I even talk about my uncle was a professor at MIT. My uncle was one of the top people at MIT, but I'm smarter than him. I'm smarter than anybody. I come from a very smart family. It's a smart family. And, you know, like we're smart. I had an uncle who was a great professor for, I believe, 40 years at MIT. And I used to discuss nuclear with him all the time. I understand nuclear. Look up Dr. John Trump at MIT. He was my uncle, many, many years a professor. I used to talk nuclear with him. In fact, every time I say I had an uncle who was a great professor at MIT for 35 years, who did a fantastic job in so many different ways academically. He was an academic genius. And then they say, there's Donald Trump, an intellectual. Trust me, I'm like a smart person.
I first stumbled across John Trump while watching the 1983 documentary, The Cosmic Conspiracy, a documentary which covers UFOs and government conspiracies.
Whoever you may be, wherever you may live, this program contains material and information that is vitally important to you and your future. It is sensitive information that until now has been kept secret. Flying saucers, laser guns, secret experiments in travel through time and space. Are all these things pure fiction, imagined in the minds of science fiction writers? Or are they glimpses into the future of planet Earth and the coming technology? Are the people of Earth being conditioned to accept a new world? These questions were the reason for a worldwide search for the truth. A search led by Stan Deyo, an inventor and computer technologist from Dallas, Texas, who at one time was an officer cadet at the United States Air Force Academy and an informant for the FBI. This is his story, to uncover the cosmic conspiracy.
This documentary features UFO researchers Stanton Friedman and the infamous Bill Moore, discussing UFOs and the government cover-up.
Primarily, I wanted to question them further on the cover-up of UFO investigation and to see if they had any more information on government projects such as the Philadelphia experiment or electric flying craft. I wasn't really prepared for what they told me.
I am convinced, after 24 years now of studying investigation, that the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial vehicles. Some UFOs are somebody else's spacecraft. I'm also convinced that some small group in the government of the United States, and probably in other countries as well, knows very well that we're dealing with alien spacecraft. We're dealing with what in the States is appropriately called a cosmic Watergate. We're not convinced that everything should be put on the table. Technical data, for example, I'm not at all sure should be out on the table, because the key feature about flying saucers, forgetting philosophy, religion, and all those other areas which are certainly important, has to be, how do they work? Every government in the world would like to get its mitts on that kind of technology. Unfortunately, what that would mean, better weapons delivery and defense systems, I suppose. And so I don't think that data should be put on the table unless everybody puts all their data out on the table.
And we both feel that it's very, very important for the future of the race to recognize at some point in our sociological development that we are planetary creatures.
Stanton Friedman and Bill Moore had made huge waves in the UFO community around this time for bringing the Roswell UFO incident back to the attention of the public. Their uncovering of the Roswell case also put them on the government's radar, which led to them being the subject of disinformation and information campaigns, but that is a topic for another video. This documentary also features John Trump. In 1943, John Trump was tasked by the US government to go through the scientific papers of the recently deceased inventor, Nikola Tesla, to see if there were any new sciences that could be of use to the US during the war. These papers were classified for decades, with many remaining to this day. John Trump discussed his involvement in collecting Tesla's papers for the government, and John stated that there was nothing of tangible interest found amongst Tesla's files.
Dr. John Trump, the founder of High Voltage Engineering in Boston, Massachusetts, was called in at the time of Tesla's death to inspect his papers. Dr. Trump was one of the few people in America who could read and understand the advanced work that Tesla had been engaged in. But Dr. Trump had been instructed to search for something in particular.
But I was particularly looking for something which would be evidence of a secret weapon, which I was reminded by the agents, the two agents who were present during the entire time, was a matter of concern to the United States.
Tesla had written to the King of England and to the Tsar of Russia, offering a secret weapon. Both these countries at the time were involved in all-out war against Germany. Dr. Trump recalled the supposed properties of that weapon.
It had the capability of acting at a great distance, of being destructive to flying objects and things of that kind at a place which was remote from the source.
This is the safe of Nikola Tesla. It once contained his most prized possessions, his most secret papers. Miss Musar had arrived too late to know who had opened Dr. Tesla's safe or what had been removed. And Dr. Trump had found nothing which he considered dangerous or a secret weapon. Tesla had been a naturalized American citizen for 54 years, so why were his papers seized by agents of the custodian of alien property?
The strange coincidence of witnessing Stanton Friedman, Bill Moore, and the president's uncle in the same documentary surprised me. Why would the distinguished uncle of Donald Trump agree to appear in a conspiracy documentary that featured UFOs? This appearance was one of John Trump's final media appearances before passing 2 years later in 1985. At the very least, this is interesting, so I decided to look further into John Trump and found some surprising connections to the UFO phenomena and some of the alleged major players involved. Donald Trump has stated on numerous occasions that his uncle would talk to him about classified projects, namely relating to nuclear development. Keep this in mind as we go over John Trump's life and career, that he would discuss classified material with his nephew. Now we already know that John Trump searched through all of Tesla's files upon his death on behalf of the Alien Property Custodian Office for the US government. But how does one get this position? They must have been extremely smart, which John Trump was. John Trump received his bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the New York University Tandon School of Engineering in 1929, his master's degree in physics from Columbia University, and his doctorate in electrical engineering from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in 1933. He was a professor at MIT from 1936 until 1973 and helped pioneer X-ray machines mainly aimed at cancer research. It was at MIT that he met and became friends with Vannevar Bush, who many within the UFO community will recognize the name of. Vannevar Bush was an American engineer and science administrator known for his work on analog computing, his role in the development of the atomic bomb and other weapons during World War II, and the idea of memics, seen as a pioneering concept for the World Wide Web. Vannevar Bush was the top scientific advisor to Presidents Roosevelt and Truman. Within UFO lore, many believe that Vannevar Bush was also the scientific head of MJ-12, a purported organization formed in 1947 by an executive order by U.S. President Harry S. Truman to facilitate the recovery and investigation of alien spacecraft. The fact that John Trump would be friends with Vannevar Bush and spend so many years alongside him at MIT was another strange coincidence I found regarding the Trumps and UFOs, but it doesn't end there. When World War II broke out, Vannevar Bush was tasked by President Roosevelt to create the National Defense Research Committee, or NDRC, an organization with the goal of researching developing sciences that could help America gain an edge in the war. In 1940, Vannevar Bush asked his friend and colleague John Trump to join the newly formed National Defense Research Committee as technical aide to Carl Compton, president of MIT and chairman of the Radar Division. In 1942, John Trump became secretary of the Microwave Committee, a subcommittee of the NDRC. John Trump became a leading figure in the new institution of the MIT Radiation Laboratory, or RAD Lab. Many of the researchers from this lab would go on to work on the Manhattan Project, creating the first atomic bomb. John Trump would remain at the MIT RAD Lab and become one of the top radar researchers in the country and help develop some of the nation's early radar systems that helped the U.S. win World War II. John Trump also served on the Advisory Specialist Group on Radar to General Carl Spaatz, who was the commander of Strategic Army Air Forces in Europe and the first Chief of Staff of the Air Force upon its creation in 1947. Now, just to reiterate, John Trump was one of the top radar researchers in the country and advisor to Commander General Spaatz during World War II and the following years, including during the infamous Roswell UFO incident, which occurred in July of 1947. General Spaatz claims to have been in Washington state on a fishing trip during the Roswell event and claims to have had no knowledge of Army Air Force planes being used to search for them. But his flight records and other newspaper articles released at the time indicate that during the Roswell fiasco, he took an emergency flight from Washington to Fort Worth, Texas, the location the Army originally broadcast taking the UFO wreckage before they were ultimately shipped to Wright-Patterson Airfield in Ohio.
The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucers. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brizell was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wrightfield, Ohio.
John Trump never made any public statements on UFOs, but the fact that he was willing to appear in a conspiracy documentary with Bill Moore and Stanton Friedman, who were on the government's radar at the time, the fact that he was the scientist called on by the government to research Tesla's scientifically complex papers, the fact he was good friends and colleagues with Vannevar Bush and part of the National Defense Research Committee, and the fact that he was one of the top radar scientists in the country and radar advisor to General Carl Spaatz during the Roswell UFO incident lead me to think that the US government would have called on John Trump and his knowledge to help make sense of UFOs following the Roswell UFO incident. And perhaps if he was brought in to help make sense of UFOs, he would have shared some of that classified information with his nephew Donald, like he shared classified information relating to nuclear weapons. Now let's look at the connections Donald Trump's presidency has to UFOs. Many of the biggest developments to come out regarding UFOs happened during Trump's presidency. Now, if you watch some of my other videos, it is clear that the wheels for releasing all the current UFO news were put into motion before Trump's presidency began, but it is still worth noting what developments have been made. For context of why the news over the past 2 years is significant, let's look at the history of the US government's official stance on UFOs. In response to a wave of UFO reports during the 1940s and 1950s, the US Air Force began 3 separate projects to study UFO cases. These were Project Grudge, Project Sign, and Project Blue Book, spanning from 1947 to 1969. At the end of these studies, the US government stated that UFOs do not exist and that they do not study them. It should be noted that many of the people who conducted these studies for the Air Force later stated that they were forced to provide prosaic explanations of swamp gas and weather balloons to cases that were clearly UFOs in order to prevent public panic. Dr. J. Allen Hynek, an astronomer who worked on Project Blue Book for the Air Force, and Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, who also investigated UFOs for the Air Force under Project Grudge, are among those to make these claims. Regardless of what Hynek and Ruppelt said about the investigations, the official stance by the US government was that UFOs do not exist and they do not study them. This was the official stance held by the US government for nearly 50 years, up until 2017, when the government revealed the existence of a secretive program called ATIP that studied UFOs.
Tonight, CNN has learned the Pentagon had a secretive program to research UFOs like the one Fravor spotted. The project was called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, run by an official named Luis Elizondo.
At this time, 3 separate recordings of UFOs captured by US Navy fighter jets were declassified for public consumption. The first time in history this has happened. Since then, there has been a steady flow of serious information regarding UFOs to be released. I cover these stories in greater detail in my other videos, but to quickly recap, since the initial ATIP revelation, senators have been briefed on UFOs. The Navy has publicly updated its UFO reporting guidelines. The Navy confirmed the objects in the videos are UFOs. And most recently, the US Army entered a cooperative research and development agreement to research materials allegedly from UFOs. In the wake of the 50 years of denial by the government, each one of these stories individually would be major. But the fact that they are happening in such close proximity to each other after the 50 years of denial is telling of a major shift in the way in which government views the subject. And like I said, this shift was put into motion before Trump's presidency, but all of the aforementioned stories happened while Trump was president. Another big aspect of Trump's presidency has been the creation of Space Force. Now, Trump has never said that Space Force is designed to deal with UFOs, but I think people should be aware of Senator Richard Blumenthal's statements regarding threats in space during Space Force hearings.
The most important facts for us and the American people to understand are the facts that haven't been said today. And the reason why they haven't been said is that they are largely classified. And the reason that's important is that the American people have no idea, really no idea, about the immensity of the threat in space. And I've made this comment in a classified setting that I wish the American people could be present in this room, because our adversaries know what they are doing. We know what they are doing. They know, we know what they are doing. But the American people have no idea.
Now let's look at some weird UFO events that occurred surrounding Trump. These two events occurred when Trump went to North Korea and the week of Thanksgiving 2019. When Trump went to North Korea to meet with Kim Jong-un in July of 2019, South Korean radar picked up a UFO flying near the DMZ. The American and South Korean militaries determined that dispatching jets to intercept was an appropriate reaction. The jets were unable to intercept the object on radar, and the authorities later stated that it was a flock of birds. Perhaps the authorities were nervous because of the circumstances, but these radar systems encounter flocks of birds every day. The event that occurred in Washington, D.C. in late November 2019 was very similar to the event that occurred in North Korea. In the early morning of November 29th, a small plane was reported flying around restricted airspace in Washington, D.C. NORAD stated in since-deleted tweets that senior intelligence officials are monitoring the situation on a national event conference call. Our jet fighters are on site and responding. The plane is not considered hostile at this time. Because of this alleged plane, the entire Capitol was evacuated and the White House was put on lockdown.
The White House was on a brief lockdown this morning, and the U.S. Capitol building was evacuated. It was reported that a plane entered closed airspace. An all-clear was given, and the lockdown at the White House was lifted.
The White House went on lockdown for 20 minutes Tuesday morning. An unauthorized aircraft was reported in the vicinity. All Capitol buildings were also on lockdown, and staffers arriving were not allowed inside. An all-clear was given once officials deemed the aircraft was not a threat.
Statements out of NORAD and NORTHCOM, which does air defenses for all of North America, and they've said that aircraft have been taxed. So that in vernacular, that means they've been scrambled. They've sent up fighter jets. So we'll see to what extent and what sort of details there are about this airspace violation, if there's still a threat. I can tell you here at the White House that the lockdown is over. In the past, when this happened, I believe it was in 2003, when the Capitol was evacuated and there was an airspace violation, it was because the governor of Kentucky was flying in and forgot to turn on his transponder and didn't know that he was in violation. So sometimes these are simple, just aviation errors. Obviously, they take all precautions at the White House and the Capitol, as well as the Pentagon, and fighters have been scrambled. Well, they at least have been tasked. I should be clear on that. They've been tasked, and we'll see to what extent we get updates, but the White House no longer on lockdown.
NORAD then stated that the object was a flock of birds, and then followed it up again by stating that it was a glitch. Now, both of these events could have very well been a combination of glitches and human error, but these errors do not occur often, and these radar systems distinguish between birds and planes every day. At the very least, we should be concerned about these flaws accidentally starting a nuclear war. Now, the last point we will be discussing when pondering if Trump knows more than he is letting on involves To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. To the Stars Academy is a company with the goal of helping the government reveal the complex truth of the UFO phenomena to the public over the coming years, and they are largely responsible for changing the serious nature in which UFOs have been discussed recently. This organization is composed of respectable people like Lou Elizondo, who ran the Pentagon UFO investigation program, Chris Mellon, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Steve Justice, retired Program Director for Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, among others. In 2018, someone closely tied to Donald Trump would join To the Stars Academy. Chris Herndon, the Deputy Assistant to the President and Director of White House Information Technology. This position was created by the Obama administration to establish and coordinate the necessary policies and procedures for operating and maintaining the IT and services provided to the president. The responsibilities include modernizing of existing IT estate and adoption of new tools. Chris Herndon was appointed by Trump and left this role to join the team at To the Stars. I think it is significant that someone so closely tied to the president is now a part of To the Stars Academy. We will close with Trump's public statements made on UFOs. Trump claims that he doesn't believe in UFOs, but his responses are suspicious. Now, to recap the things to consider when pondering if Trump knows more than he is letting on, Trump's uncle was the scientist called on by the US government to go through Tesla's papers, being one of the only people smart enough to make sense of them. He was close friends and colleagues with Vannevar Bush. He was one of the top radar scientists in the country and radar advisor to the head of the Army Air Force during the Roswell event. For Trump, remember that unprecedented developments regarding the government's public stances on UFOs have been made during his presidency. Trump's emphasis on expanding Space Force, especially in light of Senator Blumenthal's statements. 2 separate weird UFO events have occurred, resulting in jets being dispatched and the Capitol being evacuated, and someone from the Trump team is now a member of To the Stars Academy. Let me know in the comments if you think Trump knows more than he is letting on, or if he hasn't been told anything.
You and I, we know we disagree about that, but we have a whole day ahead to go on this. Before we go, one of the things you have as president is the access to all the information in the world, all the mysteries out there. And I was just struck in the last couple of weeks, we're reading more and more reports of Navy pilots seeing lots and lots of UFOs. Have you been briefed on that? What do you make of it?
I have. I think it's probably... I want them to think whatever they think. They do say, I mean, I've seen and I've read and I've heard, and I did have one very brief meeting on it, but people are saying they're seeing UFOs. Do I believe it? Not particularly.
Do you think you'd know if there were evidence of extraterrestrials?
Well, I think our great pilots would know. And some of them really see things that are a little bit different than in the past. So we're going to see. But we'll watch it. You'll be the first to know.
You gave an interview the other day in which you said you've been briefed on unidentified flying objects. Are they real?
Well, I don't want to really get into it too much, but personally, I tend to doubt it. I mean, you have people that swear by it, right? And pilots have come in and they said, and these are pilots that are not pilots that are into that particular world. But we have had people saying that they've seen things. I'm not a believer, but, you know, I guess anything's possible.
We spoke to a government official recently who said the U.S. government had wreckage from a UFO in a facility on an Air Force base. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't heard that, no. I haven't heard that. It has not been within government, has not been a big thing, but I've seen it. I've seen it on your show, but I've seen it. I don't assume it's correct, but, you know, I have an open mind, Tucker.
I know you do, Mr. President. Thank you for that.
Nowadays, you can believe anything, right?